I think we'll go ahead and get started. Very excited for our panel and for this conversation today. This is our production consultant webinar, and today we are joined by Gaytana Carrino, Jacki Angeletti, and Karen Blatchford. Gaytana has over 20 years of experience owning and operating a full-service photography studios. She's dedicated to the production process from bid to wrap and has a strong attention to detail, which consistently delivers high-profile campaigns on schedule and under budget. She currently works at APR and leads the stills image practice. Thank you for joining us today. Jacki has been with EVP for the past 13 years as a senior consultant. Prior to this role, she was a senior art producer at DDB Chicago, JWT Thompson, and Schaefer Condon Carter, where she was a print producer and created an art buying system. As a producer and a production consultant, her clients have ranged from small-scale productions with celebrity talent to, large-scale productions with celebrity talent to small-scale tabletop shoots. Her goal is to always maintain a strong integrity of transparency, fair pricing, and open communication. And our third consultant is Karen, who brings a broad perspective to this conversation as she is currently freelancing as a production consultant and art buyer. Prior to freelancing, she worked on the agency side as a senior art producer for over 20 years at top agencies such as DDB, FCB, Abelson Taylor. She's also worked as a broadcast manager, artist rep, and a creative recruiter, lots of hats. And she enjoys solving problems and partnering with agencies, clients, and artists. So thank you guys for being here today and for having this conversation with us. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yep, happy to be here.
Great. So I'm going to kick it off with our first question over to Jacki. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you became a production consultant at this point, in your career? What led you to this trajectory?
So at the time I was at DDB Chicago and had been working closely with EVP and had also worked with other consultants, companies. And the opportunity presented itself. And at the time it was a good segue to get a different skill set. So I did transition over to this side of the fence and have stayed here, obviously you said, for 13 years. I didn't realize I was going to be here for that long, but it's been a really good run.
That's amazing. And Karen, how about you? How did you enter this side of the business? Because you also had many different hats.
Yeah, I've been on a lot of different sides of the table, and actually Gaytana, she and I worked together years ago when she was running a photo studio and I was producing, and that's how we first met. And then when she went to APR, we stayed in touch and were friends. And when I knew that the agency life was kind of changing, I think she had reached out to me and said, would you ever consider, becoming a production consultant? And I said, sure. And we kind of stayed in touch. And then I think APR was looking to add someone to their team. And I was so grateful for her that she thought of me. So Gaytana and I worked together for about 2 years. And then I ended up going back to the agency side. But yeah, I've repped, I've been a production consultant, and I've produced. So I've kind of seen all different sides of the table and have learned from every side of that, which I thought kind of helped me be a good production consultant. And to be honest, most production consultants, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jacki or Gaytana, the good ones come from the agency background. And they're the ones who are knowledgeable and who have the understanding. Just like in everything in life, there are people that are good and maybe not as strong, but I've found that I think the best production consultants are the one that come from the agency background, that understand what everybody's going through.
So, and Gaytana, there's been a name shift too. It was at least a few years ago, I always heard cost consultant, and now I hear production consultant. Can you give me a little bit of that background and how your side of the industry has changed just practically along with that name change as well?
Yeah, I will say I've been at APR about 12 years now. And prior to that, I was always on the production side, not the agency side. So working with cost consultants was very much the dark side when I was on the production side. And hearing some of the unknowledgeable, I don't know if that's a word, things that they wanted to take out of bid, it just didn't make sense, because it's like, don't you understand what we're trying to produce and what we're trying to deliver? So when I joined APR, I was intrigued because they were calling themselves production consultants at that point in time too. And their ethos was that they're not there to shave 50 cents off of a bid. They're there to really educate the client and to help the client to understand industry costs, industry benchmarks, making sure that the right scope of work and the right cost, are married together. So I think that shift might have been slowly happening for about the past 10 years. But, to Karen's point and Jacki's background too, the more knowledgeable that you have consultants who come from that world, I think the more we're there to sort of partner and not just be cost consultants. Because we do more than that. We look at everything, not just the dollar amount.
That's definitely really interesting. I so appreciate that background. Heather, I'm kind of stepping on your toes. Do you want to take it
No,
over?
that's okay. I mean, I can chime in, and I'm always curious, how does someone become a production consultant? And, how many are there of you? And is it a growing industry, or yeah, where are you in the production consultant world that way?
I'll jump in first if you want, then you guys.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't direct that to you.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, honestly, the reason I made the jump so not like interesting is I had small kids, and I was tired of being the person who was on set, at 5 a.m. and working till midnight. So I had no idea what this was all about, but I thought, wow, it'll take the skill set that I have, and maybe I can learn some new skills. And I learned so much about clients, and I had always thought production was the be all end all for a client, and then realizing like it's this much of what a marketer has to do on their plate. So it was just an opportunity that seemed right. I don't know how big, Jacki, maybe you know how big the industry is. I know a handful of really good consultants out there.
There are several, production consultant companies. And I think that, we've been around for over 25 years, and I think APR, you all have a lengthy, there's MRA. There's a handful for sure. And then there are some smaller, more independent companies that are production consultants. And I think that it started primarily in the broadcast realm, and then just developed into, print production, photography, now event planning, influencers. And I think that it gives clients that are not familiar with production a state of mind, because we're kind of the segue that explains things and more of the detail. It's almost like, I know nothing about an engine, so when I go to the mechanic and he, explains to me what's going on, it's just more clear to have somebody who's more of a subject matter expert on that particular thing. And I think that our role is to, what Gaytana said, is to educate the clients more so than they already know about production and such.
Do you stay specific to your category, like print or broadcast or events or influencers, or do you kind of, the jobs that you work on spread around? How about you, Karen? Or
Sure. I'll when I was at APR, I was a print subject matter expert. And I think different companies work differently, but at APR, we have our specialists. And so if it's a broadcast production, you're going to get a consultant that has broadcast background. Same with experiential print. I worked on print, so everything I did was exclusive to either a piggyback production to broadcast or print, or in that realm. But I think different companies work differently.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and build on that, Karen, too. I think there's a value to having somebody who has that depth of knowledge. If you look at the three of us, we all probably have 20 years plus in this industry, agencies and a lot of producers at the agencies, it's really taxing because they have to, I mean, there's such a merge of all different mediums on any given project. So producers have to handle an influencer and video and still and everything at one time. So working with people who really have that knowledge and that expertise in that area, like we always say, you can't become a subject matter expert on something until you have, at least 15, 20 years. So I might see things that have some video pieces to it and I could probably pick my way through it to understand. But if I really want to go to expertise or to Jacki's analogy of the mechanic, like I'm going to go to somebody who builds engines. I'm not going to go to somebody who changes tires,
One quick question I was wondering was, do you all primarily work with ad agencies, or are you also working direct to brand? Jacki, I'll toss that to you.
So we do both. We work with, we have specific brands on our certain clients. We all have a handful of clients that we work on. And there are times when we go directly through the clients. There are times when, I've even dealt directly with the rep. So, and I think that, I know talking with APR, you all have a similar platform also.
But you're hired by the brand, correct? You're not hired by the ad agency, or are you sometimes hired by the ad agency?
No. So we are hired by, I'm just going to say it's no longer a client of ours, JCPenney. So JCPenney hires EVP, and then and then our partners with their agency. And we let and I remember the last time we were speaking, Gaytana, it's a big, and Karen, it's a big partnership. We're partners with our agency on behalf of our clients. So that, I don't know, Karen, Gaytana, if you guys want to add to that.
Well, I was just going to say that it's definitely the brands who hire the production consultants. And I would say the main reason for that is for education, because as we touched upon earlier, the marketers are doing so many different things. I think one big reason why production consultants have become more and more popular is how everybody's expectation of transparency is just expected. We've all been doing this a long time. So I think if we combined we'd probably be closer to 60 years of experience than 20, but I appreciate you being so polite, Gaytana. But back in the late 90s when I was starting out, you could easily pad let's put a $10,000 pad on it, and no one questioned it. Well, okay, those days are long gone, right? I think everybody is nodding yes.
Yeah.
So it's the big help and benefit production consultants have is education, and it's to educate the clients of the reality of what it takes to make a production happen. And they don't know what an average digitech costs for a day rate or hair and makeup or whatever. So a lot of times we're defending the costs for you guys. I know you got a lot of people, when they hear production consultant, cost consultant, the first thing they think are, there's those people that get the cost down. That's not always the case. And some of the times we're going to bat for you guys and trying to get more money.
I think that's a really interesting point to bring up, because when it comes across our desk, it is always about cutting the costs, right? It would be really wonderful to know also where you've supported what we've got in there. Because I do think a lot of people do have that initial reaction when the email comes in, and we're all happy to defend our work and explain it. But sometimes there are questions that seem, why am I being asked this? Or, oh, of course we need to charge that, or whatever. So it's really great to hear you say that, because I think there's a lot of people out there who may not have ever heard that before.
Gaytana or Jacki, do you want to give them a specific case where that happened?
Yeah, I can jump in first, and I can sort of tell you, I have a feeling it's similar for both Jacki and Karen too, but sort of the methodology that comes with looking at bids when we're tasked with doing that. So, we really partner with the art producers from the agency, and sometimes there's just a little bit of extra knowledge that we might know from the brand team as far as, budgets, how limited they are, additional usage that they might need or not need sometimes when they're looking at work. And so oftentimes I think it goes back to what bid specs are like how the agencies are sharing bid specs with you, the information that you have that you're bidding it out. Because sometimes if we just get a bid and there's not the full context, I mean, what I do is I put my producer hat on and say, okay, if I were producing this, yeah, I would need 10 days for a producer. I would need, and you sort of go through. And if there's some things that don't seem right, then it's just a question. Oh, why would you have this? Or wait, you're shooting on a beach and you have talent and I don't see a motorhome. Where are people, changing? So I think that actually is one instance where I've added things to the bid. They were like, oh, if we need a motorhome, we'll build it later. It's like, no, build it in now. You are going to need a motorhome. So that's kind of how we do it. And I think, though, understanding your full bid spec, so we could see exactly what you were given. And then if the photographer puts treatments together, seeing the photographer's treatment as well with the bid, that helps us because it's like, oh, this is why they would want this kind of lighting package, is because this is how they're approaching it. So I think all of that helps.
That's so interesting. So I put so much care and effort, as I know Heather does, into our job description. Do you actually see our bids? Because I will sometimes hear from my art producer, then I've got to put it in our form. And I'm like, oh, are they going to get to see my bid? Are they going to get to see my treatment? But you do get it. Jackie, you get to see all of that?
We will see the treatment. I'm not on every account, but on most of my accounts, I see the treatment and we see the bid. And personally, I prefer it to be on the reps formats. I know some agencies do put it on their own format, but I prefer to see it on your format. It's easier for me to follow, quite frankly. So we see the bids and then we'll go over the bids. And there are times if we're asking a question, I think Heather, you had said, if we're asking a question that seems pretty basic, it's truly because we don't know the answer. And I know on a lot of the accounts I work on, we do have to answer to the brand. We also have to answer to the brand, to the marketing or procurement, and just to make sure that we are fully answering it accurately. So that might be, no question is a stupid question, but there are times when it might seem kind of, oh gosh, why are they asking this?
Yeah.
I know Gaytana Carrino, if you guys, you just want to make sure that you're really fully understanding the production, because just on the flip side, the producers are so close with that, and I don't want to call it minutia because it's not, but the minutia of the shoot, the guts of the shoot, and things happen on the agency day to day that we're unaware of on this side. So there are times when I'll get paperwork and I'm like, I don't understand this. Can we hop on a call or can you email? I know you're busy. Or I might just shoot questions and she'll shoot them to you guys without even looking over it. So, just trying to be fully educated so that we can articulate everything to our clients also.
I think for our listeners, it would be a really great idea, if you don't already do this, to ask the art producers when you're working with them if the cost consultants have seen the treatment. Are they looking at our bid? I think that's not something I've thought to do before. I think I've just assumed it was all kind of being shared. But to your point, you're asking a question because you have it and it's not being answered, right? Some of the questions aren't, why do you have this or why don't you have this? Some of the questions are, cut this from producer from 1,200 to 750, cut this, it's very directive. But if we knew that you on the more bigger picture type questions, if you didn't have, if we knew that you had our treatment or our job description, I think that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, because we don't know what the agency producer is putting in their chart, and maybe they're not including all of the information. To Jackie and Gaytana's point, I mean, I always prefer to see your estimate than what the agency provides, because I don't know if they're, I'd like to see the descriptions that you guys put on there that explains the reason why you're bidding things the way that you are. It's helpful for us to understand.
Yeah, very.
Your approach.
The other thing that we don't often see, and actually Kelly and Heather, this is for both of you, and sometimes we'll go back and we'll ask for it, is is there, when the photographer and when you've put bids together, do you have a production calendar that you base it on as well too? Because again, when you're looking, you know, especially at a complicated shoot and a lot of crew members and a lot of days, having a calendar and understand sort of when they think they're starting, when the producer goes on the job, you know, again, that helps the vision of how you're bidding and why you're bidding in certain ways. So do you guys typically send a production? You do. Oh, both nodded right away.
I try to always, because a lot of times I'm in a panic. Like, oh, this is coming up.
Can we back up for a second? Because I think something that would be really interesting to explain to everyone is the difference between a production consultant and procurement, and how your roles are different, and maybe how you might help in the procurement process. How about you, Gaytana?
Kind of hoping you go to Jacki first, because I thought
Okay.
she something that I could go, yes, whatever Jacki said. So I think where we sit with a client is different for different brands. So I think sometimes we answer to two different departments. So we do answer to the procurement department, who has, you know, goals and different budgets that they're working with. And then we also answer to the marketing department and to the brand leads. And, you know, that's where a lot of the education comes in as well. So I think we're fortunate in a way, because of the fact that we're consultants, that we understand the marketing world, but we understand the cost too. And so we could sort of work with the procurement team on what their needs are. I don't know if that quite answered it.
I think it would be helpful to explain what procurement is. And I'm deferring to you guys, because I don't deal with procurement nearly as much as you guys. So
yeah, so procurement in our world, in my world, is they're more involved with supply chain overall. I think the marketing department is more specific, but the procurement are in my world, again, they're also very, they're the keeper of the budgets and the holder of the funding. So they need to be more educated on costs. I mean, marketing, I feel like oftentimes looks at the production overall. And oftentimes we're explaining to procurement why this is costing so much, why you need to have, you know, 3 stylists because you've got 40 talents. So I do think that marketing versus procurement, like it's more of a supply chain effort for procurement. And it's more of a broader role, whereas marketing is more specific. Do you guys think that's a good explanation? I know it's kind of.
I thought that made sense. And I think too, you touched on something, Jacki, you know, procurement, or sometimes they're called the sourcing teams at the brand, you know, again, sort of production or marketing is one tiny piece. They may be looking at suppliers who are also doing packaging, or, you know, if it's an automotive company, they're looking at people who make their tires. So to them, photography and production are widgets, just like widgets are widgets. So, and they might have goals and sort of cost structures that they need to meet. And they're a little different than marketing's goals. So, you know, and to Jacki's point, sometimes we have to answer to them, and sometimes we have to make sure that we're working within their guidelines too. So, and then sometimes it's a conversation with a marketer explaining why you can't go above this threshold, or how the creative might need to change to stay within these guidelines from procurement.
Mm-hmm. It's a new layer for us as far as production consultants, because we have to answer to procurement now and our marketing clients. So it's another layer. Not all of our clients have procurement, but the majority do now, I feel.
Yeah.
And I would say from my past experience, it seems that the brand people are the more production savvy people, and procurement, sometimes they don't really understand production at all.
Exactly.
At all.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time dealing with procurement is educating what we do and why we do it and what it costs, because a lot of them have no idea.
I think it's really helpful to know that you have to answer to 2 people sometimes, or 2 roles sometimes, because while you are defending the production and educating the people on the agency side and the brand side, you're also trying to manage within a budget, and you're getting this pressure from the procurement people who might be asking questions about lowering rates, or why do you need all of these people, and trying to find ways to cut that without the knowledge of our industry, maybe thinking that we're a widget, it might seem obvious for them to, cut here and there. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I never understood that you've got the money people that are like, well, this photo shoot cost this, why can't we do that again? And that you're having to defend both sides.
Well, and I will say too, and then we can move off procurement, but in our industry, there's been such a democratization of photography. So, everybody and their brother can become a food photographer when they're Instagramming their dinner. We know that's not true, but sometimes procurement is like, oh, we're doing a food shoot. I don't understand, to your point, why we need all these people. Why do you need this? And it's like, because photography is still a craft, and photographers are craft people who understand lighting and composition. And there are times when, your brother's Instagram photo is exactly what you need, but then there are times when you need to go to a craftsperson to, deliver an actual, like, highly produced production.
What's your advice for people who have questions from cost consultants and don't want to cut a bid and don't think, they can't reduce the producer from 1,200 to 1,000, or they don't want to take the second stylist off? And, we're hearing one side is, well, the other person is cutting, and it comes down to the bottom line. And, you're feeling the pressure of wanting to do the production right, but also get the job. What's your advice to work with you guys most successfully in those situations? How about you, Jackie?
The more knowledge, for example, if, there's a request, and that might not only solely be on our part, it could be with both the art producer and us. Just knowledge, like, okay, 1,200 for producer, bring this person, can you bring this person down to 1,000? No, we can't, because this is the rate, and this is who, the photographer wants to work with. We're unable to accommodate that, it's just explaining why you can't take it down. And that is what it is. So we would never, our role is never to make a creative decision. We could not say, we'll get a different producer. That's not up to us, So I think, don't you guys agree? Like, just explaining it more so that we're aware, so that we can explain it to procurement or our clients.
Yeah.
So we should just answer the questions as thoroughly and non-defensively as possible.
Yeah, I think so. And you still might get some pushback. It might be, well, I still don't understand that, or I still know that, the producer you particularly want is this $1,200 a day, but we do know there's a whole handful in LA. Like, can you explain again why you can't get the producer who's $1,000 or 12? Like, what is it about this particular producer that's going to make or break it, or that's going to make this photographer uncomfortable if they have to move away from, their established person? So I think the more honest the answers are, I think is great, and ultimately, it still comes down to the creatives too. If the creatives really feel aligned with the vision of one photographer, they'll really push to work with that person.
And nowadays, I'd say, most people, it's pretty standard to have a triple bid, and, everybody asks for that. So if the agency recommend is a certain photographer, and their crew rates are higher because they're their preferred vendors, we can just relay that information. But at the end of the day, it's the brand, it's dollars that they're spending in. And what I have found is, it seems to me agencies used to have more power, more say in the situation. And what I've found over the past 5+ years is the clients are the ones that are making the decision. The agencies will give a recommendation, but their recommendation at the end of the day is only a recommendation, and it's the brand's decision. So just be prepared that if the agency says you're a reco, that does not mean you are getting the job at all.
God. We
Because
laugh because we don't want to hear that we're the reco anymore. When we hear that, we're like, no, I didn't hear that. Don't tell me that.
So I went on a streak where I was like, that's the kiss of death. Don't tell me that.
But
Well,
I think part of, oh, sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask the question, like, in order to win the bid, sometimes I feel like I have to be the lowest number. Is that a misconception on my part? Gaytana, I'll toss that to you. Does it always have to be the lowest number?
No, I think it depends. You know, I think it's all very much the project, the client, what they're doing. But in many of the projects I work on, it's not the lowest bid that wins. You know, it's and sometimes there's not that much of a discrepancy between the bids. You know, usually what happens is, you know, really good agents like you guys and reps, you know, you bid smartly. So you bid with the right industry rate. So it's more of a concern if you see, you know, bid for a project that's $200,000 and then you see one that's 75,000. It's like, whoa, like what is going on here? That's where the red flags are. And so sometimes we would even advise, like, you got to look at that 75,000. Is that covering everything you need? So it's definitely not the lowest bid. I know sometimes going back to Heather's question, and sometimes it's not even about like cutting things out just because you're asked to cut things out, but it might be just having more flex. And, you know, a lot of times budgets kind of shift. So if we know, you know, there's a certain budget or they're taking some of that budget out because they need to put it somewhere else, rather than even saying, can you take $200 off? It's like, here's kind of where it needs to come in. Like what's your flex? Like, how do you still deliver what you need to deliver? But like, where do you think you can pull things out? If you don't want to pull it out of the producer, do you think you can pull a little bit out of props? Like, you know, leaving that decision to the creatives who are executing it and not to, like Jacki said, we don't get involved in the creative, so not us.
So that's interesting. So if I'm like, no, I can't pull it from my producer because this person is really a part of our secret sauce, but you know what, I'll go ahead and I'll lower props by $500 and be a little bit more aggressive in that area, then if we're looking to bring the bid down, then that's acceptable. I think that there is, and Jacki, I'll put this question to you. I think there's an impression by reps and by artists that, you know, production consultants are generally paid by how much money they save. And so I'm just curious, like, how does the compensation model, if you could pull the veil back for us on that, it'd be so curious and interested to know.
Yeah, we don't recoup. We're primarily retainer with our clients. We don't recoup. It's not a recoup. You know, like we cut that by 5,000, so we get that. You know, I don't get that. Darn, I wish I did. But no, I don't get that. And Gaytana, Karen, is that the platform the same, the retainer?
We work on a retainer base, and so we're not, our fees don't go against how much we save at all.
Oh, so the whole company, it's just, this is the retainer for services and it's not matched by how much is saved. You don't have to send some sort of report at the end of a project.
We will track, you know, so yeah, I mean, we definitely track sort of, here's where the savings are, here's where budgets were, you know, we tell the story of it, you know, everything from the production details to the spend details, but we don't get, you know, I don't get any extra pats on the head if I save $5 or $1,000, and nor do we get any money for doing that.
And production consultant companies don't get paid by the savings that they save. It's more of a, like you said, a retainer.
When you guys track the jobs, are you taking into account what the art producer and we have negotiated and cut and changed from the beginning? Because a lot of times by the time it gets to you, we're trying to make it as tight and smart and, you know, good as possible. But are you following that earlier as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but you know, how it all starts is after the creative is approved by the client. You've got your creative, this is what you want to execute. And we have a pre-bid meeting where we go over all the logistics of the shoot. And it's your production consultant, your agency, your client, anyone who's a part of the production. And then we get our bids come in, and then we discuss our bids with, with the our partners. And then, the negotiation happens, and then we have a pre-award call, and that's to make sure that the client's on board with everything, who the agency is recommending. And then to Karen's point, during that you know what, I don't want to go with, photographer A, I want to go with photographer C. So in that respect, there could even be times that hypothetically, a photographer C is the most, because, the client's aware of where all 3 photographers have come in. And the client might say, I want you to go back to photographer C and get them lower. It's not always, our recommendation. It's all a collective discussion. But the money that, there are times where my brand clients will say, oh my goodness, our budget was $1 million, you came in at 800. That gives me an extra $200,000 to go shoot something else, like a smaller shoot. So that's their budget. That doesn't come to us.
Is there ever a point in the process, Jackie, I can ask you this, that you ever talk to a rep, right? When you have questions, or because you 3, I'd like to work on every one of my jobs that I have cost consultant, by the way. So but I also often ask when these questions come up, and sometimes the art producers are frustrated, and I'm like, can I just talk to them directly? Can I, is there any engagement that I can have? And I'm always told no. But how does that work on your end? Are you just not interested in that?
Well, it's usually our platform. The communication is through the through the producer. And I know, Heather, you and I talked about this before, because I think we had worked on a production during COVID or something. That COVID has skewed my perception of time. But I think because we had worked together and known each other, I think you did direct a question to me, and I did answer it, and the producer was on it.
Yeah.
So I think, it's a little bit flexible, but no, primarily we use the producer as the sounding board. But, and I don't know, APR, Gaytana, Karen, I think it's a little different for you all.
Yeah, so Karen, I'll let you speak to even some of your
I
experience.
was just going to say, I usually don't speak with agents. It's not because I don't want to. I would be more than happy to, but we don't want to step on the agency producer's toes.
Yeah.
And so, if the agency producer would call and say, would you be open to having a conversation, I would be absolutely open to it. But most of the time, I think they prefer to just deal with you guys directly than to include us. I don't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say too, sometimes, I personally work with some really great and strong and lovely art producers, and they all have their own relationship with you and, and all of the talent that you guys rep. So, we're not producing the job, so we try not to step on their toes. And then, Kelly, to your earlier point too, or I think Heather, you said this, some of the best ways that we work with our producers is at the very beginning, having the conversation. So they're not doing a lot of back and forth, negotiating with you before we see things. We're seeing everything all at the same time. And then ideally, we're going back to you with combined one set of questions from the art producer and from us. And I would think that would be a more efficient use of your time and the photographer's time too, as you're looking at things, to not cut that down and then have to cut it further because the cost consultant comes in at the end stage.
Yeah, ideally, we are on the same page from day one. To your point, we would prefer not to have an art producer come and share an estimate with us that's already been reduced. Then I would say, can I see where you started? Yeah. Because that's helpful for us. Hopefully, ideally, we want to be involved from day one.
That's so interesting. I feel like, and maybe it just depends on who the art producer has worked with before, but I do feel like I've had an art producer say to me and they're using the term cost consultant, not production consultant, but they're like, oh, there's a cost consultant, so just know that when you send me your bid. And my impression is then oh, I gotta stuff some money somewhere because I gotta be ready to cut. Is that just depending on who the person's working with and that just in everyone's field, reps differ and production consultants differ. Is that just certain people and their approach to things, or what would you say in that instance? Gaytana, I'll throw it to you.
That's a tough one. Again, I think this group too, we're really all about transparency. And so it's such an icky feeling to think that you'd be given this directive that you have to work with a cost consultant. So make sure you put an extra $5,000 in that you could then pull out and make everybody happy. Because that's really not what we're about.
I don't know that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna just full transparency, totally honest. I used to do that. Before I was a production consultant, cost consultant, when I was on the agency side, when I found out there was a cost consultant, I'd be like, okay, we're going to add $5,000, or to each estimate. So I know we can bring it down. So then, that was early on. And then later on, how I saw my job as the best producer as I could be on the agency side is, I don't want this to be about money. I want it to be about the creative. So my job is to get all 3 photographers to come in at the exact amount or within $1,000. If I can show the agency that all these people are coming in the same, then it's no longer about the money. It's about the creative. It's about their portfolio, their link, the samples they show, the treatment, the conversations, the creative calls that they have. Because as you guys all know, or maybe you don't know, but you would triple bid, we think we have an agency reco, then we have the creative call. The creatives had a really great conversation with this other artist that they've never worked with before. And so now they're no longer the guy who they worked with before is no longer the reco. They really like this idea that this photographer had. So I saw my job is to try to get all 3 bids as close to the same cost as I can. So it's not about the money and it's about the creative.
That's interesting. So maybe it's also some education on the art producer side of understanding your role as well.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people when the bids are presented and you're coming in on budget and you're still being asked to cut? That does happen a lot. Maybe I'm thinking out loud now, maybe that's happening when you've got 3 bids and somebody's coming in lower than the budget, right? That could be an option why we're being asked to bid, but it does come up sometimes when there's a production consultant involved that we will have hit the number, but we're still asked to reduce things to come in lower.
I would say in that instance too, I wonder if everything is apples to apples. Is one artist bidding in a way that all captures are included, and another artist is limiting a number of images. So maybe that's not exactly apples to apples, and so like that may be one of the reasons potentially.
Or is it because the agency forgot to put in retouching and now they're backstepping and they're like, oh shit,
that happened.
That was supposed to include retouching. And
oh my gosh, you're onto something.
So if that would happen, I would be like, why? I would really ask a lot of questions of why, if you came in budget, why all of a sudden? That seems very fishy to me.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another question that's been coming up twice in the last couple of weeks. We're being told that they have access to previous bids that we've done and are comparing them when it's definitely not apples to apples, different job, and sometimes even a different brand, right? But we're not being told what the estimate is at all. We're just saying we have access to information that says you've charged less, which is really hard to defend because maybe we offered a discount, maybe there was different usage, maybe it's the creative was different, sometimes I can't even talk about that because I'm under NDA. So it's very, very hard to defend. And I find this coming up a lot more recently. What is your experience like that? Do you have access to that information?
What we do from previous, from previous, bids, like we have a database. I mean, APR, I know you probably have a database also where you put, all of your bids. So we're able to go back and historically see where an artist has started, where they ended. And that would tell us the story of that particular artist. If they charge, 7,000 for a day rate and now they're charging 10,000, we would say, I mean, clearly we're not going to pull something from, 2014 and say, oh, we see that he used to charge 3,000, now he's 7, I mean, within reason.
And each project is completely different. I mean, that's happened to me, Heather, on the agency side. I work with project managers, and I'll give them a cost and they're like, oh, we worked with that photographer 4 years ago and that was the rate. I'm like, okay, well, what was the job? What were the, how, each, you can't even.
Is she frozen for you guys too?
Frozen.
Okay, I thought it was maybe just my screen.
Karen, you might want to log back in if you can hear us. So do you think it's fair to say to the people who are listening that are given that directive or been told they have that information, is it okay for them to say, I don't know what that bid is that you're referring to, and these are our rates for this project, and if you need me to cut or come in at a certain budget, let's discuss that. But comparing me to another job, especially where I don't have the information, it's kind of too hard to defend.
Yeah, I would ask a lot of questions. I would say, are you talking about a job we actually were awarded, or a job we just bid on for your brand that we didn't get? And again, yeah, you might be looking at a host of whole other things. Going back to procurement for a second, we have to be really careful, and I tell this to procurement teams all the time, is because we work across a lot of clients, we sit on a lot of knowledge. So if you're bidding, if I'm looking at bids for 2 different clients, 2 different projects, 2 different budgets, I would never sort of say, oh, look they charged, 500 at this line item for this client, and now they're charging 700 for this client, because there's a whole host of reasons. And procurement sometimes wants to look at that, and it's like, that's a no-no. Like, that is so taboo. It's different if it's that brand and they bid you last year and they're pulling up an old bid.
I agree.
And then I would question it. What are you looking at specifically? Share that with me, and then we'll talk about why it's different this year.
But I mean, even when we were producers, being a producer at the agency, Karen and I worked together at DDB. There would be times if we were, if I knew she shot with, a photographer, I would go in and say, hey, what was a photographer's day rate? What did you get them at? Because we're also talking to our clients, and we have a budget that we're trying to keep in mind also. So we don't want to, go in and say, oh, the day rate's 30,000 for just that photographer, when it's really, they don't have that much money. I mean, I know that's an elaborate, day rate but what we would talk amongst ourselves as producers to get a feel.
I think some of this conversation also goes to what the usage on a project is that ends up impacting a photographer's day rate. And there's a lot of conversation that is happening around usage, especially as the stills world starts to converge with the live action world. And I'd just love to hear a little bit, is that another part of education that you're having to do with these brands to try to help them understand usage and why it's important? I'll kick that over to you, Gaytana.
Short answer, yes, definitely. And I think it's still a little bit confusing to all of us in the industry, and it's not necessarily very formulaic, and especially when you start talking about photographers moving into motion, because historically on the motion side, when a director does work for a brand, that's work for hire. So that client can take all of that footage, whether it was used, what was left on the cutting room floor, and use it for something else. Whereas in the photography world, that's not how we've looked at usage. It's the intellectual property of the photographer always, even if the brand is hiring them. And that's why sometimes it's a library, sometimes it's a number of images. I will say that what we've seen and where it's moved to is sometimes brands are doing more of library shoots. So they're shooting a lot, but they may not know exactly what purpose they're going to do. So usage is even tricky for them to define because they don't know what it is. So they'll go in sort of almost asking for everything. And then sometimes when they look at it, it's like, oh, maybe we can't afford this, or maybe we can't do this. So maybe now we have to kind of peel it back to look at that. So it'd be interesting too, Kelly and Heather, to see if that's happening too when you're getting asked to bid things.
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm always trying to encourage clients to pay for what they know they're going to use it for, which is typically that digital social content, and then for us to layer the options on top. Denise Gilmartin, who's the VP of Business Affairs over at the AICP, and she's an advisory board member for the AMA. We talk about this a lot because the work for hire came into live action way long ago, when it was about like pushing detergent and cornflakes and diapers, and now television is such an art form, and it's in so many different formats. But in the stills world, we've always been in many different places, which really warranted that usage. And now we also are doing moving images, and so trying to keep that usage conversation going. Karen, what's that like for you with clients in your world, and trying to educate on usage?
Oh, Karen, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I will say it seems like it's trending that we're seeing more and more that because clients don't know where it's going to be used, they want to get usage for a year for unlimited, just on all shots taken, not even, like 3 or 5 images. They want everything because they don't know where it's going to be used yet, which is, I've kind of always, for a product shoot, I think it made sense to do that, but now clients are asking for all shots taken for lifestyle shoots. So I guess we do try to educate, like, where are you going to use this? But oftentimes the answer is they don't know. So to cover ourselves, to be able to try to use as much content as we can in many different places, we are finding ourselves unlimited, but we try to at least limit that to a year, and then we will pre-negotiate the second year use and sometimes the third year use. So pre-negotiate future years ahead of time.
Jackie, with all the emerging media that's coming out, the AMA created a usage glossary. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at that. Is that a useful tool for you and what you're doing in the education that you're trying to provide to clients as well?
Of course it is. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great.
And if the clients would ask for it, we would show it to them. I mean, we do try to educate clients as much as we can regarding usage. And I know we have some questions. I don't know if they should be fielded. I see that we're kind of close to our time.
Yes,
but,
definitely.
Like about the usage to the specific, like, thanks for limiting the usage to a specific time frame, which is, I think the question's from Betsy Johnson. Thanks for limiting the usage to a specific time frame.
I think that was based on what Karen said, was that
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
1 year, and then they pre-negotiate the second and third year. And we are all feeling the appreciation for that, because we'd much prefer not to charge you for things that you don't need. And a lot of times people ask for way too much, and the budgets and the fees don't really reflect the amount of usage that they want. So
and that's a tricky, it's not really a tricky question, because clearly, I mean, and Heather, we've talked about this before, and Kelly, that we want to be fair to the photographer. Like, there are clients who want, like, for the library of images, that, unlimited usage or whatever. That's not really, we definitely try to limit the usage for sure, or to make sure that the artist is getting paid to reflect the amount of usage that the client wants.
Yeah. I think, I'm opening this question. There's a lot of really great questions from the audience too. So this is from one of our audience members. what do the panelists think about the idea of a universal bid form? And do these consulting companies have like standard guidelines like the AICP that the AMA is trying to come out with well, we've launched a job description checklist and we're about to launch a universal bid form, just thinking that that would be really helpful so that you have that comparison all the way through. Is that a tool that would be helpful for you guys, especially when dealing with procurement and trying to show things?
Yes, I want to jump in on this one.
Like, yes.
Yes, 100%, because that's always the challenge too. When you look at an AACP, A to K, exactly sort of what's in there, and different photographers will bid differently and have different formats. So what one person puts in, a Digitech line, another person will break out, and so it is sometimes hard to do that. We do have one client that we help them develop a standard universal bid that they use to give to all of the partners they bid with. And so it's sort of like, if you want to work with us, you must submit your bid on this. And the idea of bringing some of that across this industry, I think would be huge and so helpful, and help photographers too, to understand.
Yeah.
I think it'd be great.
We're close.
The aggravating thing with the AICP form, because we do look at those sometimes as well, is they still will turn in 10 pages with every line item that's not populated. So I would wish that if you do that, like to take out what you don't need so that it doesn't.
You're doing it.
We're doing it.
Your wish is our command.
That's part of why it's taking so long, actually. But that's great. Yeah, and then we also have that job description checklist as well, so that we try to think through everything you guys might need to know in terms of the details of why we put these numbers in the bid. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah. Another question from the same person. Dana, you're full of great questions out there. We've also been seeing jobs primarily with the video component coming in with broadcast production insurance requirements. So $5 million in coverage, E&O, cybersecurity. We don't tend to have these types of coverage requirements that a TBC job does. Are you able to help educate procurement on the differences there? And is that something that the cost consultant is doing to try to bring down some of that? Because those are very expensive.
Yeah, I've not seen that. I don't know, Gaytana, Karen, have you all?
I saw it once, actually, not that long ago. A lot of the companies I work on, the company holds the insurance policy. So really then all the photographer would have to do is cover their workman's comp. But we did see it on something where I think it was something shooting offshore too, where the requirement was they had to up their insurance policy. And actually it was a question I had. I was like, why is your insurance so high? And then there was the explanation that, they needed to cover and carry all of this. And yeah, and then we looked into it and we did have to explain that to procurement. So, but it doesn't.
I find that I usually ask, I don't want the photographers including their insurance, because usually the agencies have their own preferred, or their clients have their own specific insurance companies that they want to work with. So usually that is a separate line item that the agency provides, and it's not provided from the photographer.
It's interesting, there's with the conversion that's happened with the live action world, there's so many things, like the treatments that we're producing are really extensive and take a tremendous amount of time. And even the bidding process and the bid letters that we put together, and there's all of those expenses that a live action company would have a markup cover, but that hasn't always been afforded to the stills world. Is that something that you see and that you hopefully potentially champion as well? Jacki, I kick that to you. Are you starting to see a markup on the still side more?
Yes. And it always helps to have an explanation of what that is, and what that's covering, so it doesn't look like a markup, like just a point blank markup. I know that I had a few reps indicate what it was, and we did come to a fair percentage. But I don't think it's warranted for every production.
Yeah, because sometimes on the agency POs, even though they're providing the wrap-up insurance, the PO still requires that I hold errors and omissions and cybersecurity and things like that. And so that's where our markup would end up covering those things. Gaytana, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in full agreement with Jackie on that too. We have seen it. We've seen different percentages. We've had conversations because I've seen it cover different things. You know, again, if you're sort of comparing it to the video world, it really should just be on expenses. You shouldn't be marking up fees at all. You know, sometimes we've seen a markup, and then we've also seen sort of a hefty line item for like administrative fees or office fees. And you know, that to me, that's a little double dipping. It's almost like pick one. But I come from a photography background, so I know that there isn't the overhead. You know, we don't have that built-in markup the way production does. And so, you know, those photographers' fees are going to cover their agents. They're going to cover, you know, keeping the lights on if they have a studio. So a lot of that comes out of that. So I'm not opposed. Some brands say no, we won't pay it. So I'm not opposed to it as long as it's fair and it's right and it covers the appropriate line items.
That's great. I appreciate you guys going to bat and understanding how much. But I think that speaks to your experience that you've been on the agency side as an art producer and understanding how the industry has evolved. I know we've kind of gone over time, but this hour flew by. I learned so much. Thank you guys for coming on and chatting with us today.
And as I said, I literally want you on every one of my jobs. So I'm going to request you. I'm going to ask that they hire your companies.
Before we end today, I just want to let everyone in the audience know that coming up mid-November, we have an insurance webinar coming up. I know so many reps have started to manage productions internally, and we want to make sure that you have the appropriate coverages, which is appropriate since we're sort of ending on an insurance topic here. So please go to the AMA website and sign up for that as
well. And if you're not already an AMA member and you're eligible to be so, check out the website and please join today, because joining allows us to do more things like this and educate the industry and you know, help push us forward and have these really amazing conversations. So
yeah, Jackie, Gaytana, Karen, thank you again. We appreciate you guys so much.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
bye everybody.